Okay, so, well, I'm BB Soto, as my tarot reader name. And really, I would say I'm still in the middle, or even maybe in the beginning, or ongoing spiritual awakening. But I think I can look back and say that the first time I really thought much about spiritual connection was when I became a mom, not to sound too cliche. But really, as a child, I had some things in my life that didn't really make me feel super connected with my family or the people around me. So I didn't really see myself as being like spiritually connected in that way. And then I had a child, and the connection, the bond between us, he and I still to this day, we're very closely linked. There's definitely like a connection there. Is when I started to really realize there was definitely more going on to nature and life than what we could see. I was raised Catholic, and that always got into a lot of trouble because I used to question a lot of things. I was a very literal child, and so I had a real difficulty with the idea that a lot of the biblical stories were allegorical, metaphorical, like, so I would get into a lot of trouble for questioning like semantics and like literally, please tell me, how did Jesus walk across that water? And their answers didn't ever really like line up. So to this day, I have a very split personality in the sense that like I have a very empiricism, like things that I can see and touch, kind of mentality, like, but then I also have this very like mystical interest in the occult, the esoteric. I've always been fascinated by tarot, even as a child when I thought it's what witches did. And so the way to tarot I think is like the cross point of two things. I was an art history major in college and just absolutely fascinated by the miniature arts, which is like your illuminated manuscripts and card decks and little teeny tiny book of hours, which were prayer books, where the artists had to use symbols to really relay the messages, and they had to do it in this teeny tiny little way. And because the average person in the Middle Ages was not literate, and so it fascinated me that the symbolic language in the artworks you would find in churches is how people knew their Bible stories, and they could go from one church to the next and see a rendering of the Annunciation, for instance, which is when Angel Gabriel tells Mary, "You're with child." That's what we call the Annunciation. And different artists who would depict it in completely different ways, but people would know they were looking at that because Mary's cloaked in blue, wearing her white headdress, holding a white lily that Angel Gabriel just gave her. And often she's in a domestic setting because she's not the royal Queen Mary of heaven yet. She is very much an earthly woman being told that she is with child. And that just fascinated me. These little symbols, we call them attributes of these people. And when you look at like Hindu mythology, it is insane. They have different gods and goddesses all throughout the country of India, but they will recognize theirs based on what like Shiva is holding in this way. Shiva, for example, is represented as different elements of Shiva, and they know them based on the way he's represented and what he's holding in those arms that we are so used to seeing Shiva have all those arms. And so that to me is like amazing. And then as I went through art history more and realized that like this culture, this religion, worlds apart, well not worlds apart, but an ocean apart, have very similar stories, very similar beliefs, but call them by different things, but will also tend to use very similar symbolism to represent similar ideas. And that's what we in art history would call archetypes. Like you have the mother and child archetype throughout cultures. So, and I'll hold off on getting into Carl Jung and his archetypes in a minute. So I had my love for art history. I had my child by the time I graduated college, and I chose not to pursue graduate studies because it would mean moving out of Orlando, and our families were here, this was home. So I went a different way, and briefly after, I wanted to lose baby weight. And so I started doing yoga, which was something I could do while he was napping, and then discovered that yoga had profound impact on my mental health. And I became a single mom not too long after he was born. And that was a very stressful time that led me to realize that I had struggles with my mental health that needed to be addressed for the well-being of me as a mother. I didn't want to pass them on to him. I wanted to set a strong example for him. Mm-hmm. And I found a wonderful therapist who believed in yoga, meditation as means of finding mental health. So I deep dived into meditation and yoga. I am a certified yoga teacher, and through that, I can remember the first deck I had was my Namaste deck by Tony Carmine Salerno, if I'm remembering the artist's name 100% correctly. And it just so happened that I'm really big into yoga, and then I was walking through a store and I see this deck that says Namaste, and I said, okay. So I bought it, had no idea really that oracle cards were related to tarot cards or anything. Mm-hmm. I hadn't really thought about tarot cards in a long time. And I started using that in my yoga practice, pulling a card before or after, meditating on the meat, and finding that every time I pulled the card, it was exactly the message, mm-hmm. like they were talking to me. And then I was gifted an animal oracle deck, and from there it just snowballed into getting back into learning about symbolism, and not just symbolism in the cards, but say you're walking down the street and this plant has called your attention, or this blue jay swoops down and just grabs your attention. I started to learn about what do those symbols mean. And then finally one day I had known at the back of my head for a very, very long time that I had always wanted to learn tarot, but had been really intimidated by it because it's basically learning a language. And I finally said, you know what, you're not getting back into art history. That's probably not going to happen. Your life is not taking you on that path. So this is your outlet. This is your way that you can bring back your studies of symbolism into your life, do something with it, have an outlet for it, and you don't have to go get your graduate degree to do that. And so that's how those two avenues kind of intersected and brought me there. And I would say that motherhood and yoga are very much, from the start of my yoga teacher training year to the end, I had no concept at the beginning how yoga was a spiritual practice. To me, it was a mental practice, it was a physical practice. Mm-hmm. And by the end, I knew how it was a spiritual practice. And I don't think I can explain it in words. That's something that I think everybody has to find for themselves.
Absolutely. And there's so much that you just mentioned that I have so many questions about. And I want to go back to when you brought up your Christian background. Do you find that it's hard, or do you find that you have any type of resistance toward learning more about tarot and I guess the New Age spirituality, or even Christian occultism, mysticism? Do you feel like there's any type of resistance in learning more about that because of your Christian background? Or are you pretty much just jumping into it?
I absolutely believe God talks to us through these symbols and signs. Mm-hmm. I absolutely believe that. And I believe that especially in Christianity, I can't say with certainty because I'm not super well versed in theology, though I do find it fascinating. But in Christianity, I find there's almost less of a separation, at least when you're looking at Catholic medieval history, let's say we're reserving, between the mysticism and not, because, for instance, Saint Teresa of Avila was said to have these ecstatic moments with Christ. And you and I were talking about the Baroque earlier. One of my favorite sculptures is Bernini's Baroque sculpture of her in the middle of one of her ecstatic visions of Christ. Hildegard von Bingen, depending on who you talk to. She's a mystic, or she's just a nun who was a really good herbologist and, you know, had migraines, or there are people that believe that she was absolutely having visions sent to her directly by God. And you would probably recognize them of the Bible, of Dante's Divine Comedy. Now, the movie Inferno with Tom Hanks, based on the Dan Brown book, they went with the Botticelli illustrations, but Gustave Doré's illustrations are actually probably more famous and included in more books than Botticelli's are. And he illustrated, his Bible illustrations are some of the most famous Bible illustrations. In fact, the Barnes & Noble Classics version of the Bible has his illustrations. Dante's Divine Comedy and William Blake's Paradise Lost he's famous for those, and it was a big thing in his life. He wanted to be a famous painter, but nobody recognized him as a painter, but he was such an amazing printmaker that's how he really made his career. So this is called Les Saltimbanques, which is roughly translates to the acrobats, roughly translate to the performers. So back in the day, a lot of the circus would have foot acrobats, so like street performers who would do acrobatics right there as you walk by on the street, and that's what we're looking at here. And she has cards out at her feet, so it's implied that she's also acting as a fortune teller while her husband is an acrobat. And this is actually really, really such a sad painting for being a story for such a beautiful painting. The little boy has just fallen doing acrobatics and is going to die. And mom is holding him, and this is the scene of that pain. But he has purposefully likened her to the Virgin Mary here with her robe and her crown. And the owl is a symbolism of wisdom and often associated with Athena and goddess figures. White dog is purity and innocence. Notice the white dog is looking at the child while we have a darker dog in the back next to the very sad dad. And so, but again, this is a fortune teller being depicted in art. Here's another one. These I'm not as familiar with. I found these by just kind of digging around. But this is La Chiromante, which chiromancer usually refers more to someone who does like palmistry type fortune telling, but here we have the cards out on the table. And then this is just another one from that same period, that Belle Epoque. And then here we're getting, this is Lucas van Leyden, so that's Northern Renaissance with the fortune teller, and she's got the cards out. And then this is a really famous fresco in an Italian villa from the 1440s showing, these are tarocchi players, so tarot comes down from a card game called tarocchi, and then it was a card game, and then it began being used as a fortune telling device. And so depending on which version of the history you read, it changes when it shifted from a card game to fortune telling, and whether it came out of France or it came out of Italy, or is it related to the Chinese and the Egyptian card games. So it's the history is very murky, but I love this one. This one is just, I love it.
Yeah.
I wonder if this is like where people get that idea of like the fortune tellers wearing turbans and having headdresses and stuff like that. Depictions like this. Approach, and I say I'm learning tarot through the lens of symbology.
Okay.
While learning symbolism through the lens of tarot. And there is a whole school out there, and when I say school, I mean school in the broader sense of many, many people who learn in the same way, that follow and learn tarot through more of a Jungian lens. And so when I say Jungian, I mean Carl Jung, who was Sigmund Freud's protege until they very much differed in opinions and separated. Carl Jung is really the Western psychologist that coined the term collective unconscious and archetypes, and that idea that we as human beings carry around wisdom that is not just our own through our own experience, but is wisdom that is collective. That's the collective unconscious. And we are carrying around all of the wisdom of all of our ancestors, of everybody that's ever lived, of all of humanity's experience. And we can tap into that. It is all with us all the time in our psyche. So Freud had the idea of the psyche. He came up with the ego and the id, the idea that we have two. And Jung took his map of the psyche and dived deeper. He's also where we get some understanding of the concept of the shadow. Like he, in some way, there's always been this idea, I think long before him, of the idea that we have a shadow, that we have darkness within us. But he's actually the one that coined the more wider known term for our shadow self, that there's shadow in there. So my approach to learning and reading tarot has always been through the fact that if I lay out cards and I tell you the archetypes, the symbols that I'm seeing, they're going to mean something to you. They mean something to your life. I use my intuition to see, because all the cards in all the decks have multiple meanings. So my intuition is in reading and my experience, and it's always ever evolving, is in the reading the cards together as a whole, as well as individual, as well as their meaning, as well as the meaning of the symbols. One of my favorite examples is I have a deck called the Light Seers deck. It's based on the Pamela Coleman Smith tradition. And I was reading the cards for a woman, and sure enough, the card itself meant something to her. She absolutely, but there was actually, it's kind of a bohemian deck. There was a little VW bug keychain in the picture, and that had special significance to her. That card was pulled for her that day, and that symbol meant something specific to her, as well as the symbolism in the card. So one famous tarot reader who is very well versed and also reads from the Jungian perspective is Mary K. Greer. She's written books about reading tarot this way. She's taught classes about reading tarot this way, all from this perspective of these archetypes are present in the cards. They will mean something to all of us. So my readings are a little less esoteric, which would be people who are more well-versed in Kabbalah. And mine are more, I use them more as a tool for self-reflection. And almost in that idea, most of us are familiar with some movie that shows people looking at those ink blots, and what you see in the ink blot will reflect something similar to that. The cards that come out for you, the symbols that we read together, will mean something for you directly in your life. And I do believe that there is a magic to it, that the cards that are in the deck that are relevant to what you need to hear, the messages you need to hear, whether you believe it's from God, universe, spirit, whoever, are the cards that are going to show up that day. They're the cards that are going to get pulled. And so I am not saying I will never go. I am starting to really become fascinated by that esoteric Kabbalah lineage. But if you are reading a deck that is based in the more traditionally known as the Rider-Smith-Waite deck, they were intentionally trying to make it less esoteric, though they had the foundation. They were members of the Golden Dawn, which is the cult group from the turn of the century. But they were intentionally using Christian iconography to make the deck more accessible to people through more archetypal readings. And while Carl Jung did not directly influence them or vice versa, there's overlap. They were around at the same time, they were contemporaries, they were living in the same world with the same politics and lifetime events and everything influencing their work, and they happen to be kind of like working like this.
That's so interesting. So I realize that you're using your intuition for the most part when you're reading your cards. Do you feel like if for someone who is who's starting to read their own tarot cards, would it be beneficial for them to also use the book that's included, or just solely focus on intuition?
I did.
Just whatever helps.
I think whatever feels right to you. I've met people who have never used the books, but I am at heart a researcher and a history nerd. And even in art history, one of the things that always fascinated me about art history, I was not very concerned with technique, media, or anything like that. Mine was in the artist's stories. I wanted to know about the artists and how the artist's experience and life was being reflected in their art.
Absolutely.
So I've always had to dive into the background. I've always needed that information to help inform what I'm seeing and reading. But I do think that if you are someone who is like me, who's very tends to want to read up and learn that way and have a guidebook and signposts and things like that, I absolutely recommend reading not only books that you can buy about tarot, but the book that comes, especially if you're going to get a deck that is not one of the traditional decks, because that artist might have intentionally altered things, have differences in their meanings that they were including. I have a nature deck. It's the Forager's Daughter's Tarot. You can get it on Etsy. She grew up like out in the wilderness, like on a farm. And she even breaks down individually, like I picked this animal to symbolize this, I picked this plant to symbolize this, I picked this crystal to symbolize this. Her choice of what she includes in her cards is very deliberate. So I absolutely recommend to anyone who maybe likes to rely on the intellect as much as the intuition to read the books.
Yeah.
I don't think you have to. Like I said, I've known people who have never read the books, but I've read every book that comes with every deck, and I have found that every single one of them tells me something new.
Yeah.
You know, about symbolism that the last one didn't. I have learned so much from the little guidebooks that come with them.
Exactly. Like for me personally, it's nice to have that confirmation, because first I'll read it intuitively first, and then I'll go to the book and I'm like, oh, okay, I had it right, you know? There's sometimes that I have it wrong, and I'm like, okay, let me look at it a different way, because it's not wrong. It's just the message that I got when I read the card in the first place was correct. It was just for me in that moment, if you know what I mean. Okay. So, you know what I mean? It's like, don't overthink it too much, because I have a habit of doing that. And I think a lot of us do, yeah.
Well, I think that cards show up sometimes not because of the meaning behind the card in the tradition, but because of literally something that's in that picture.
In the picture, yeah. That
reads in the flow of the other cards. And I've absolutely picked up guidebooks and read them and go, nope, sorry, I don't agree with that meaning. It does not feel right in this reading.
Yeah.
Like that, there's something else to it. So yeah, I do the same thing. And then being fascinated by what I call overarching archetypes. I also love to read all of the different books, because I like to see what the readers or the artists who have even changed or reinterpreted or whatever still pull over, and I like to put together those connections of like, this card in all of these decks seems to really represent this.
Exactly.
And I like to pull those out for myself.
That's so cool. And I want to go back to Carl Jung really quick, because I don't want to talk about him too much, because it'll be like the entire video, because it's absolutely fascinating, the archetypes. But so for me personally, I am really connected to my dreams. Like, I've had a lot of premonition dreams. I'm still having dreams that are telling me things. And that brought me into learning about Carl Jung because I was attempting to do my dream interpretation myself. So I've been doing, I would say I had a dream journal for like 2 years now. And I've created my own sort of dream dictionary where I use his archetypes to be able to determine, what my dreams are meaning or the meanings behind them. So for someone who is doing very similar work that I am, can you give me your opinion on how they can use the archetypes to interpret their dreams or even just the certain things that are happening to them in their life? It doesn't have to be dream work.
Oh, absolutely. I think, oh gosh, there's so many things just came to my mind. Okay, so for dreams particularly, like Carl Jung says, there are things like there's thoughts, emotions level to the human consciousness, unconsciousness, collective unconsciousness, all of that just can't really be spoken in words, and we tend to see them in images in our dreams. And so keeping a dream diary where you start to notice there's a similar theme. Like with mine, I might not necessarily see the same vision or the same thing, but my dreams can lean to be very emotional. And so while they might have different people involved or different settings or different whatever, if I'm dealing with the same emotion over and over and over again, I'm like, okay, I need to deal with that. So, but as far as symbols go, so say you're regularly dreaming about being in the same place or with the same people or going through the same situation, or you're seeing the same animal, or you're seeing the same flower, there's some significance there. And same with out and about. If all of a sudden you're noticing this flower. In fact, I didn't mention that I've studied herbalism over the last few years. And one of the ways they tell you to recognize your plant allies is, are they appearing to you? Like if you just are all of a sudden, for me it was a few years back, it was passion flower. Everywhere I was going, I was seeing these beautiful, purple, vibrant passion flowers. And I was like, okay, that's a plant ally for me right there. And then recently it's been the red passion flower, like out of nowhere. Usually the one that grows most native in Florida is purple, but all of a sudden I've been seeing the bright red one. Yeah. And that's become a color in my life. And red is the root chakra, and red is passion, and not necessarily love passion, but that fiery soul passion and protection. So, and like warding off negative energy is the color of red. So it's like, what is that plant trying to tell me? I think it was saying, hi, I'm passion flower, you already know me, but I'm going to show you red because you need, and you can see I've been bringing red into my life because I'm like,
I love that. I love when that happens.
Yeah. And so, and animals, like I have throat chakra situations on a regular basis, and crows love me, and crows are a sing your song, speak your voice, speak your truth symbol. When you hear from them, often, that's not the only thing, but that is one of their main, crows and ravens. And so I think that it's all similar to things like that. Like if you notice a reoccurring anything in your dreams, in your environment that's grabbing your attention, that's sticking out, go look into what the symbolism of that is. There's books out there. You can buy Carl Jung's book about man and his symbols. You can buy, I have several symbol dictionaries, so I usually start there. And then in the reference of like, I have an animal frequency book. So if, I find that animals usually are one of my signs that I get. And then they have plant symbolism books and things like that. And so,
I love the term plant ally. I've never heard of that before. Yeah. And it's gonna make me start kind of like when I walk around paying more attention to plants around me, because I never really do. Yeah, I'm just like, oh, it looks nice, and then I move on with my life,
And it can mean a million different things. It can
Yeah.
mean like, hey, like passion flower as an herbal treatment, as an herbal remedy, really didn't do much for me. It didn't. But as just a plant to have in my garden, it brings my soul happiness. It brings butterflies, which are a big symbol for me. Butterflies have been the symbolic thing for me. In fact, BB is short for broken butterfly.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and so if you want the background on that, I'll happily share the story.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, like, I think they can be, the plant allies can be there for you in multiple ways. The coming back around to Christianity, it's called the passion flower because the Spanish, conquistadors, conquerors, missionaries likened it with the passion of the Christ because of the 5 stamen, and there's all this symbolism in there. So, and I think my life has kind of circled around Christianity, and I've had to come to terms with coming back to that in my life, after years of questioning and being kicked out of CCD classes for asking questions teachers didn't like. So, but if you want the broken butterfly story,
absolutely.
Okay. So,
and then we're gonna go into synchronicities because you brought up a couple of things.
It's gonna be a good segue, actually. I think that's gonna be a good segue. So I had mentioned yoga,
right?
And what yoga had done for my life, and it turned my life around and helped me find a really good emotional, mental place. And then I went through some stuff that just wrecked my life again. And this time it was things like physical, disabilities that I had, physical limitations that I had to come to accept, chronic illness, things like that, things that were not, there was no one to blame, there was no victimhood to it, it was just things I had to really struggle to accept. And I didn't handle it very well at first. And I was really down about that, about the fact that you made all this progress. Where did all that work go? You were doing great, and then you threw it all out the window as soon as life got hard again. And one day I was on my bed meditating, and I meditate often in Shavasana because of back problems. And which, for those who don't know, Shavasana is the yoga pose where you're just laying flat on your back. It's called the yogic sleep pose or corpse pose. And I remember, like, the meditation, that question was swirling in my head, like, where did you go? And I was getting really a little upset at the, like, you felt like you had gone into this cocoon and you'd come out transformed, and what happened? Like, really, did you actually go through that or not? And I opened my eyes, and I have a butterfly specimen that is one of those blue butterflies, the one that's like the only place in nature where we find that shade of blue. And
I forgot what it's called.
I forgot what it's called too.
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about, yeah.
That butterfly, the blue butterfly specimen, or one of them, but the tip of one of the wings in the little shadow box that it hangs in, the tip of one of the wings has fallen off and is at the bottom. And I just, as I was asking myself about, like, how really had I ever truly transformed into a butterfly, I looked up and I saw it and I said, you did. You're just a broken butterfly, and that's okay. You've had to learn to fly on the other side of your cocoon with broken wings, and that's okay. Wow, I don't. It's
okay. I don't have any tissue though. I'm so sorry.
But that's when I was like, like, we often, maybe not everybody, but if you struggle with perfectionism, we often think that we're going to go through this metamorphosis and come out this beautiful golden creature.
Right.
But some of us still carry the scars from the past, and we have to learn to live life again in a new way. Like, a butterfly has to learn how to fly, and say a butterfly has a broken wing. They're not going to fly like the other butterflies. It doesn't make them any less beautiful, and it doesn't make them any less a butterfly. And so that's where, BB, as my alter ego, I guess, shall we say, came from, and it stands for Broken Butterfly, to remind me that I absolutely have done the work, and I absolutely am on the other side, and I'm learning to fly just with a broken wingtip.
Oh, that is so perfect. Thank you so much for that reminder, because I think a lot of us, we get stuck in these sort of like, I had my spiritual awakening here, and from now on, I'm just going to be so perfect, and everything's going to work out for me, and I'm learning so much about myself, and I'm doing the healing work, and I'm never going to be where I was when I had my first original spiritual awakening. And it's like, that's not true, because you have multiple spiritual awakenings. It's going to keep happening. You're going to keep meeting people who are going to give you opportunities to learn and heal and grow. And I just think that it's a continuous, beautiful thing. And that's why they call it a journey. You know what I mean? Yep. It's a journey. So I really appreciate you sharing that. I think it's a beautiful story. And a lot of people are going to relate to it for sure, including myself. Yeah. And do you want me to get you some toilet paper?
No, I'll just...
Okay.
And we'll be fine.
Okay. It's so funny because I was picturing a box of tissues underneath your chair before a meeting. And I was like, but I ran out of tissues. I think she'll be fine. I don't think there's going to be tears or anything, but I should have grabbed it.
I've told that story.
Yeah.
And this is the first time it's ever done that. Like, I've never had that come up. So I don't...
It's the first time the story really hit you, you know? Yeah. It's like, wait a second. Like this, I needed to hear this again because of something recently happening. And it's like, thank you for that reminder.
Yeah.
You know? I need to tell it again.
And that's why I keep it. And that's why the logo is a split open butterfly.
Oh, I just noticed that. That is so cool.
And then the BB, and my last name is Soto, which is really long. So
is it Italian?
It's not, but you're not the first person to think it's Italian. Lots of people do. No, my husband's Cuban, but his family is only like 1 or 2 generations Cuban. They had just come over from Spain, like a couple generations before he was born, and it means of the forest is what it like kind of translates to.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
I like that. Yeah, absolutely. That's so amazing because I totally connect with the forest. And I used to think that it was like a past life thing, but now I feel like everything's happening all at once. So somewhere there's another version of myself that's living in the middle of the forest who has their own little hut, because this is my biggest dream. It's just a house in the middle of the woods. And a mountain in the background, and some springs, and like that's my thing.
That's literally what oh my goodness. When I think about like if I could do the whole like just retreat from society, that's exactly what I see.
Yep.
Cabin in the woods, mountain in the background, and springs nearby.
And there's no grass, it's all moss.
Woods.
Just woods.
Yep. Like
green moss everywhere. Like I have to see that.
Yes.
So whenever I travel, I usually go to a place where there's mountains and stuff. And even though it makes me nervous because I'm a Floridian, my entire life, so flat, when I'm actually on a mountain, it makes me nervous because I'm afraid of heights. But when I get to a spot that's comfortable, then I'm like, okay, this is absolutely breathtaking.
I grew up in the mountains in El Paso, Texas. Yeah, so that's so cool. But it's funny because I also am afraid of heights now, and I am fine on foot up high, but when I drive through the mountains,
oh my gosh,
that's a little.
It's terrifying. It's absolutely insanely terrifying.
Yeah. Like we drove down PCH, which is the Pacific Coast Highway, when I went back to California, because I also lived there when I was a kid too, and my dad is still out there, and so we went out to visit, and we drove down the Pacific Coast Highway, which I haven't done since I was a teenager.
Ooh, it gives me chills.
Yeah. But it's
like don't look over. I know. It's like, why is there no railroad? Because me and my husband, we went to the Rocky Mountains Colorado, and we were driving on this road, and it's like a 45 mile an hour road. I don't know how, because there's no like railing or anything, and it's like two very small lanes. Anyways, I'm doing like 10 miles an hour because I'm freaking out. There's signs that say how big the drop is.
Oh, God.
It's like, this is 500 feet. This is 1,000 foot drop. And I'm like, I need like another wall here or something to make me feel comfortable. But they're up there. They're so used to it, whether it be raining, whether it be snowing.
And
they
I
don't
remember that.
Yeah.
And from being a kid, like exactly, like we drove through the mountains in El Paso all the time. Didn't faze me in the slightest. But we were going over, what's it called, like New Big Gorge or something in West Virginia, and my son in the back, and I'm like, just trying to get over it.
Just the word gorge. I'm like, whoa.
And my son in the back goes, man, Mom, that's a big drop down. What?
Oh my gosh. It's so insane. I don't know. I just feel like I can't wait to the point where I get used to stuff like that. Because people from up north, I mean, like they have lived different lives than people in Florida for sure.
Oh, we absolutely.
We have it so good here.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to defrost your car 2 hours before you have to go to work.
It's December.
Yeah, like,
and we're in tank tops.
Yeah, we're in tank tops. We're chilling right now, you know? And other people from up north are literally chilling. So, it's so corny.
That was a good one.
Yeah. So, I'm trying to think about one of the things that you mentioned that I want to go into. Okay, let's go take it back to tarot cards really quick.
Yes.
So you mentioned the Josephine Smith, what's her name?
Pamela Coleman Smith.
Wow, I was off. Okay. Pamela Coleman Smith. She has these sort of symbols in her cards, like the VW that you mentioned.
Well, no, those were in a deck by Chris Ann. I know there's a last name, but Chris Ann is the first name. She did the Muse Tarot and Light Seers Tarot. And the Light Seers Tarot is one of my favorite decks. I feel that she has very, very much taken the Pamela Coleman Smith meanings and very much been able to update them for like those of us who are 80s and 90s kids. You know, like, and kind of bohemian hipster, you know, like iconography, almost like what Pamela Coleman Smith did with taking the older esoteric decks and updating them and making them more accessible for people of her day with the Christian iconography. Chris Ann has really made that deck like translate to us right now.
Okay.
Like, to like things that
more modern times.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So the reason why I brought that up is because I was thinking, because I'm an artist myself, and I was like, it'd be really cool to use Carl Jung's archetypes, create my own symbols, and create my own deck. And I know that's not like a need to do thing for people that are learning tarot, but I was like, that'd be really interesting for me to learn my own symbolism. And that brings me to discernment, because I feel like that is the most difficult thing for people who have gone through an awakening or are learning more about themselves and healing and just kind of like, you know, doing the spiritual walk, right? The spiritual journey walk. And it's like, how do you discern what symbols and the messages that you're getting from your guides and, you know, source, whatever you want to call it, and be able to interpret it so that you have the message, you know? Tell me about like how that was for you, like that time range.
Well, real quick,
yeah.
You mentioned synchronicities earlier. Discernment, that word in particular, has been coming up for me. That's actually going to be, I pick a word for each year as a focus of things to like focus on, and discernment is, I just chose yesterday, was going to be my 2024 word because it just came up for me yesterday. And it's been coming up for me so much since October. It's uncanny, and it's a word that like the first time someone mentioned it, we all looked at that person in the room and went like, you don't hear that word very often.
No.
Yeah. And then ever since then, so just to go down that little side note, I find that, well, so say if you wanted to make your own deck. First of all, I think a lot of tarot readers do that who are either lean towards writing or artistry of some kind, visual arts of some kind, do that as a means of learning the tarot. Because what better way to learn it than to sit there and go card by card and decide for yourself how you are going to represent that card and what meaning you're going to put in that card. So as a visual artist yourself, if you were interested in learning tarot, I would 100% support and say that's probably an excellent way for you to learn it. And then when you get to know it so intimately, I think that's what helps inform your intuitive nature of discerning the meaning. I have a few methods that I use, and so one is because one is that I usually stick with the Celtic cross spread. It's a very traditional spread. You're going to find it in like every single book. It's going to be one of the spreads, but I've actually never encountered another reader that uses it. But that, I think, is one way. Find the spread that works for you, because I have tried countless other spreads out of other books, and they just, a lot of times I look at them and I'm just like, it's like fog. It's like I just don't see it. But I lay them out in that Celtic cross spread, and that speaks to me. So that would be tip number one with discernment, is first of all, experiment and find what speaks to you. Find the deck that speaks to you. I have many decks. Many. And at different times, I feel like different ones speak to me more. I feel like some, like Light Seers is a good one that I use when meeting with people I don't know at all, you know, because it's so, it just speaks to me so much. It's so clear, the language. It's like if you go traveling, right, to a foreign country, and you know, say their language enough to get by, but then you run into someone who's from home, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I can talk to you. You know, like it's like that. Like, so some decks are gonna feel like you're talking to someone in your non-native tongue, or maybe they are English as a second language, and some decks are gonna feel like you've just run into someone that speaks your language. And same with spreads. Some spreads are going to just not do it for you. And you'll know because when you look at the cards, you'll see the messages. And other times you'll look at the cards and go, what? Some people, I myself included, read with multiple decks. Tarot is always the foundation of the reading. We start with that because I find that to be the self-reflection tool. So whether you have a question or you don't, that starts us on the deep dive of what's going on. Then I pull out the oracle cards to do the whole like, okay, I just gave you a bunch of information about how you're feeling and what's going on in your life. Now, but usually people want to know what they're supposed to do, how to move forward. And I find that oracle cards are excellent for that. They usually lend more towards advice-giving messages.
Right, okay.
And so for those who don't know the difference, tarot cards follow a formula. They will have 22 major arcana cards. They will have 4 suits with 16 cards, 14 cards in each suit. And the suits are usually swords, wands, coins or pentacles, and cups or chalices. But some artists deviate from that, but they usually correspond to the 4 elements of fire, earth, water, air in some way, if they deviate from that original 4 suits. And so if you have a deck that follows that formula, it's a tarot deck. If you have one that's 44 cards, 33 cards, 26 cards, 55 cards, 112 cards, and they follow some other formula, those are oracle cards. And there's countless themes to oracle cards out there. The tarot deck follows another archetype, and you mentioned it earlier. It follows what we call the Fool's Journey, which is very similar yet different to Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey.
Right.
So if anyone's familiar with that, if you're not familiar with that, think Harry Potter, Odysseus, Star Wars. We could probably argue Katniss Everdeen is probably following that journey too.
So many examples. I know exactly what you're referring to. Yeah.
So that, to me, I think the discernment comes from making sure it's feeling like it's coming natural to you versus you're trying to force it to look a certain way. And trust me, that's hard.
Yes,
that's very hard.
It is, especially if you're a perfectionist and you overanalyze, and especially when your spiritual awakening happened after this big career change that you had, and that you basically worked super hard for, and you're like up here, and now you're kind of having to not unlearn, I would say, what's that term I used to use, grow down. You have to grow down and like learn more about yourself and the source of everything. Basically just start healing ultimately, right? So you mentioned when people sit down with you, at some point you provide them with ways that they can move on, ways that they can kind of heal or fix whatever issue they're having, right? So whenever, personally for me, I like to get a lot of readings, right? I really do. And I do it because I'm just interested in how the person's, gonna do the reading. I'm interested in the type of modality they're using, type of cards they're using. And I feel like, in a way, it's like, unless I get a weird feeling about them, I think it's just really cool to get different readings from different people. Because, you could be sitting there for 30 minutes, right? And then take only like one of the things that they mentioned to you. Or you could take all of it. There's a message in there somewhere. That's the whole point of the reading, right? But anyways, whenever you are sitting down with someone, in your opinion, what is something that you try to focus on whenever you are wanting to provide them a message so that they can, move on with their life in a certain way? What's something that tells you that I need to say this one thing and they'll get it, Is that also part of discernment, or is there a certain thing that you kind of prepare for before the meeting?
Well, to be honest, I don't think I've ever thought about it. I think I try to listen. Mm-hmm. I find that as I start to tell them what I see, people often want to share how that message speaks to them, and then they tell me, and then that opens up the flows where one thing I like to tell people is I feel more like a translator than a reader.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Like, I feel like the reading is just as much between the person in front of me and the cards, and I'm really there to translate and say, this is what I see, this is the language, this is the symbols that are laying in front of you. But again, I've had so many instances where people have actually found their own meanings in the cards based on what I've pointed out to them, and then they've even said like, well, I actually see this, and I've gone, okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. I ask questions because since cards can have multiple meanings, usually at the beginning of the reading I'll start, if I don't quite fully, especially with some of the more difficult cards, mm-hmm. I want to make sure that if I'm telling someone something that I see, that I'm not delivering something that could be detrimental to them. Because one thing I always remind people is we have free will. Mm. So I have had in my own personal experience and the experience of people I've read for, things that have been unavoidable that the cards have in essence predicted. But they didn't necessarily predict it in a very exact, finite, this event is going to happen this day at this time with this person. Mm-hmm. And especially when it comes to relationship readings where people want to know about what's going on in their relationship, is like, this is the outcome that the cards are telling you today as you feel right now in the situation you're in right now. But should you choose to go home and end your relationship based on this reading, that could be the outcome. But if you choose to go home and go to your person and say, hey, I had this reading, we need to work on this, and you start to make different choices, free will is always an account for it. And so that is something that I am working on actively right now, of learning how to find the best ways to deliver certain messages. I think that's what your question was getting to.
Yeah, and my question was kind of all over the place, I'll be honest with you, but no, you answered it really well. And I want to kind of ask more about, let's see, what was it? When you're doing the reading, is it something, are you using a certain clair for the most part? And if you could tell me which clair is the strongest for you and define what it is.
I am torn between whether or not I am more clairsentient or whether I'm more claircognizant. And so to define those, most people are familiar with clairvoyant, and they think that that kind of covers all of them. But clairvoyant actually specifically refers to people who see things. Then you have clairaudient. Those are people who will literally hear things. Claircognizant are people who just know things. So I'm that person who tends to just know when I'm with someone who I can't trust. I tend to just know if you're lying to me. And I don't necessarily have proof, but I know my kids hate it. They really don't like it because I just know when they're lying to me. And so that's where I feel like my intuition comes, is oftentimes I'm looking at the cards and they have multiple meanings. They can mean different things. And for the most part, I usually know which meaning this card is leaning towards today, or why this card is in this spread for this person.
Right.
But I also am very empathic, so I tend to be clairsentient as well, which to me is I sense things. So a good example is, and one that really finally cemented my trust in my senses. And I don't know if highly sensitive people lean towards clairsentience because of the fact that in general we're physically more sensitive to our senses. Like I can smell things really, really, like, you know, my sense of smell is one that's very, very heightened compared to other people. I'll smell something and other people are like, I don't smell it. And so, but one thing is like oftentimes I've grown up believing that I have anxiety, which I do. I'm not denying that I'm not an anxious person, but I get this feeling, these knots in my stomach, that for so long, for so much of my life could be linked to like, oh, I'm just anxious about this situation, I'm just anxious about this situation. But as I got older, it's like, no, there's nothing going on for me to be anxious about. And then something would happen and the feeling would go away. And then my mother-in-law has the same experience, and my nephew, through marriage to my husband, has the same experience. And that's what really started to make me realize, and we've talked about the fact that it's a blessing and a curse, because you know when something's gonna happen.
Oh, thank you. I was trying to avoid that. All right.
You know something's gonna happen, but guess what? You don't know what's gonna happen. So, because we're not clairvoyant, we don't get the vision, we don't get the prophetic dreams, we get this prophetic feeling in our stomach that's just oh so fun. And recently I had that feeling for months and months and months, going into a vacation back home to California, and my mom decided to come with us. My parents are not together, but my mom just lived in San Francisco for 15 years before moving here to be with me and my son. And so she decided to come with us. It would be the first time we were back in San Francisco since she had moved. And this trip, I didn't want to go. I was like, and I kept thinking it was about this and this, and I was anxious about this and this and this and this and this. My mom got meningitis while we were out there and almost died when we got home.
Oh my gosh.
And the minute she was in the hospital, like the minute it happened, the feeling was gone. And I was fine the whole time. Like I was in tears and scared, and yes, I sat there, and it was very horrifying. It was like Grey's Anatomy worthy drama in my life for a few weeks. She was in a coma, intubated for 7 days. But in the entire time that she was in the hospital, I knew my mom was coming home. But that feeling was gone. And so I was having, this just sense, and then that all happened to my mom, and like the feeling was just gone. Like all of a sudden, not that I felt great, but that feeling that I had been having was gone. And it was like relief almost, like, okay, thank God the bad thing that's I've been known was going to happen has happened. In fact, about 3 weeks prior I had had a reading. I had been pulling the Tower card, which is the card that indicates something is going to happen in your life that's going to throw it upside down, knock everything to the ground, you're going to have to rebuild. And it's often seen as a negative card, but the truth is usually that rebuilding comes with a new perspective and a fresh start in a way. So, but I had been sitting there, like, it kept coming up. My father has dealt with cancer in the last year. My mother-in-law is aging, and we've been worried about her. I had this reading with another reader who pulled the Tower card for me and had affirmed that it would have to do with one of our parents. So I thought dad and mother-in-law. At no point did my mom factor in.
Yeah.
But that's the other thing about the Tower card is it's unexpected. It is not going to be the thing you think is going to happen. It is absolutely going to be the thing you don't expect.
Right.
And so here you go. And the thing is that thing that happened, it was the first time that I really I didn't have my mom there to tell me how to handle a crisis, especially one that deals with someone's medical situation. My mom's an RN. She has always been there to help me get through any kind of medical crisis with anybody else. Just keep me calm and help me know, like from my kid jumping off his bunk beds and does he need to go get stitches or is he okay? Yeah, he needed to go get stitches. Mom's always been that beacon. And my mom was the one, and I'm sitting there signing papers, making decisions for her, facing the fact that the very real possibility that she might not come home, and I would then become the person in our family that is now does what she does. And she was, when she was sick, before I called the ambulance, she's the nurse. She's the one who makes the medical decisions, and she was telling me, I want to go to the doctor tomorrow. And I knew something was wrong. And if I hadn't called the ambulance when I called, she would not have survived. I had to literally go against my mom and follow my own gut, and I was right. And so there were so many things about that incident that the perspective shift that happened out of that was that I now trust my sense. And then I'm driving down the road, picking up my son from the airport a week later, filling him in. I didn't tell him too much while he was still out in California because I didn't want him to be worried until he got home and could go see his grandma. And I'm filling him in, and he goes, I just had this bad feeling that something was going to happen on this trip. And I said, you did? And he goes, yeah. He goes, going into the trip, I just knew something bad was going to happen. And that's when I even more was like, I need to start trusting
your gut.
This gut, literally, it's in the gut too.
And we hear that growing up all the time, but we really never made that connection. So I think it's sacral, right? This is the sacral.
Yeah.
Okay.
Naked, and that's where it happens.
Wow.
And sure enough, a couple weeks later, I started having that feeling again, and I just knew something was going to happen. And my business partner decided to back out of our business within a couple days of me having that feeling again. But that time, I didn't have panic attacks about it. I didn't get anxious about it because I met with another reader in between, and I asked her, I said, how do you deal with like
the sense of foreboding that's coming?
And she said, when you have it, she's like, you're right, you're not going to know until it happens. And she goes, but what you can do is you can realize something's coming, it's going to be big, and you can start taking care of yourself so that when that thing happens, you can move through it. And that was the other thing that came out of the situation with my mom. That was one of the scariest things I've ever gone through in my life, and it was one of the first times I was really good about taking care of myself through it. Instead of like stressing myself out, making myself go crazy.
And how old is your son, by the way?
He's 11.
11 years old. Oh my gosh.
He's definitely empathic, sentient, 100%. And that's the child I had that I said, like, we
are connected.
Are so connected. It's wild. Like, we literally are living parallel situations.
Business idea. I'm not sure if it's a couple, not a couple, I'm sorry, a mother and son couple on TikTok. that I'm referring to when I'm about to say this, but I think it'd be really cool if you guys work together as a mother and son, and I don't know what that would look like, or it's just a kind of an idea, because I see this.
We do.
Yeah, it's so cool. Oh, wait, you do currently?
No, I said I hope one day we do.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, are you on TikTok right now?
No.
Okay.
I only watch TikTok. I have to have something because of my background in marketing,
right?
Where so much of the interwebs and the social medias,
right,
are work for me. TikTok is the one that I refuse to get on.
Oh no!
Whether it's detrimental to my career or not, that's just good, because it is the place I go and don't work. It is the place I go and get entertained and get stuff.
And you want to make sure that you're
and it's going to stay that way.
Yeah. Okay.
So
all right. Well,
I refuse to like turn it into a place
just
where I
fun.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has to, because I love dance videos.
Oh, well, listen, it's so, okay, so obviously the algorithm will find what you like, and when I scroll, I don't see dance videos.
That's all I get.
I see about history, whether it be art history or not, I see stuff like this. Basically whatever I end up liking, literally liking, is what they show me, because it's an algorithm.
They have a good algorithm.
Yeah,
they do. Because I started out with and it even knows me that I like people who do the roller skating, tap dancing, and then the families that get in front and do their TikTok dances together.
Yeah.
Those are what my feed is just full of.
So the reason why I asked, by the way, is because there is a mother and son team that is extremely popular now on TikTok, or at least they're getting to that point. Now the son, I think he's like 9 years old. He's really young. And it's just, the reason why they became popular is because the son will get on camera, extremely comfortable, extremely confident, and he'll start talking about starseeds, Arcturians. He'll start talking about what he believes God is, what source energy is, all these different mystical things, and he speaks about it with confidence, like he knows what he's talking about. It's almost like he didn't forget who he was when he was put into that body, And the mother, obviously, she's also a spiritual person, and I think she just reads tarot or does readings, but her son is what draws everyone to the page, because it's just, how does this 9-year-old kid know all of this? I
think Paul will absolutely follow in a way, but he's going to be the expert on Spider-Man and the history and evolution of Spider-Man, and he could easily sit there, and the way I've talked to you about, it's like we'll be together, working together, but it will be different topics, I think, because the way I talk about symbolism and stuff is him with the evolution of the Spider-Man suit.
That's so funny.
Specifically,
I'm like picturing right now
the evolution of the suit and the different suits, and the different iterations. He is an encyclopedia.
That's so interesting. So I could see you guys doing videos and stuff, and you're talking about more of like you said, the symbolism.
Yeah.
And he's saying, well, this is what it is, and this is how it's connected, and oh, you like this hero journey? Well, this is how it can relate to your life, and what it's telling you about your own journey.
I think what I find is that people who are self-reflective and looking for self-reflection make for the most successful readings. So for me, I don't know about other readers. Other readers have other gifts. Other readers do have clairvoyance and clairaudient. I am different, and my philosophy and my way of reading is different. So when someone comes to me, my cards are not a crystal ball into necessarily being able to accurately predict the future. In fact, I often rarely bring up things that are going to be too predictive, or I never promise someone that I can tell them what's going to happen in their life. However, I do find that there is a predictive nature to the cards, because the cycles of life are, for the most part, kind of predictive. But I sometimes get asked questions about basically the intentions of other people, and I find that I'm not able to answer those questions very often with cards. My readings are very well lent to people who want guidance, to gain clarity in things in their life, what they should do, how they are feeling, what's coming for them. So when I'm asked to tell people about other people, I try to help guide that person to a question that is more coming back to them. Mm-hmm. And what they need to know about how they feel in the relationship with that person. Because I do believe that the energy of the person I'm with is going to impact what cards lay out. And in fact, the times where I have tried to answer those people's questions, I find those readings always give cards that relate back to the person in front of me. And so the ideal client for me is someone who is coming in wanting some self-reflection, wanting to dig deeper into themselves and have some introspection, and open to hearing messages that may not always be the lightest in that moment, and usually I will say that while readings where people sit down and say, I don't really have a question in mind, I just want some guidance, I can accommodate that, no problem. But the reading's going to be a little more specific if you have a specific question. That usually does give you, I think, better answers. Not better answers, maybe clearer answers. Your answers that actually maybe mean a little bit more to the person. If they come in with something they really want insight on.
Okay, awesome. So can you tell people where they can find you online and how they can get a reading from you?
Absolutely. I am on Patreon at patreon.com/bbsototarot. And that's where you can get my resources, you can follow me.